Hi, friend. This is Alex McRobs, founder of the Mindful Life Practice, and you're listening to the Sober Yoga Girl podcast. I'm a Canadian who moved across the world to the Middle East at age 23, and I never went back. I got sober in 2019, and I now live full-time in Bali, Indonesia. I've made it my mission to help other women around the world stop drinking, start yoga, and change their lives through my online Sober Girls Yoga community. You're not alone, and a sober life can be fun and fulfilling. Let me show you how. Hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Sober Yoga Girl podcast. I am so excited to be sitting here with Mallory Rowan, and I have been following Mallory on Instagram for a while. In the middle of last year, got really into learning about finances and kind of getting my finances organized, and I started following all these inspiring women in that realm. And somehow I came across Mallory, and she is a business and finance creator. She has online programs, and I'm sure she'll tell us more about what she does as the podcast starts. But I was following along, really intrigued. And at some point I came across the fact that she's sober and just hit 1 year sober, right? Which is really amazing. And I'm so excited to hear. She just did this amazing post about her 1 year and all the things she learned. And so I'm just really excited to hear about her journey and her work today. So thank you for being here, Mallory, and welcome.
Yeah, I'm so excited we were able to make this happen.
Yeah, it seems like I find the busier I get in my life, and then when I'm trying to get people on my podcast who are busy like you, traveling, doing things for work, whatever, it seems to be we connect and then things come up and then it finally works at the right time. So
yeah, exactly. Always how it goes, right?
So tell me a bit about you. Like, what was your life like pre-sobriety? What was your journey?
Yeah. I mean, if we go like back, so like in high school, I feel like I went to a pretty big like party high school, or I don't know if it was just our generation or what. Also being like Canadian, for us, like the drinking age was lower, which I feel like always just changes that experience. If we're like that much closer to legal drinking age, so it's like you're getting into that much more trouble, you know? So I feel like we partied a lot in high school. And so by the time I got into university, I was like a little bit more over it. Like I was still, don't get me wrong, I still drank a lot, but we wouldn't be like going out as much, you know, or it was like a bit of an eye roll because we would go over to Hull in Quebec. And stuff like that. And you're like, oh, I kind of did that in high school, you know? But yeah, kept drinking definitely through university. Always like a social drinker. And then in the pandemic, well, I went through like a pretty focused fitness phase too. So I wasn't unfamiliar to like mostly cutting out alcohol for periods. Because when I would be prepping for a competition, you're trying to drop weight into a certain weight class. So you're a little bit more strict. So I'd had that experience a bit of like going to restaurants and like being the only one not to order a drink. So that was kind of familiar to me, along with like I used to track macros in fitness too. So it's like you're already used to at the restaurant, you know, maybe ordering things a little bit differently and having those awkward experiences with people you're with. And then started drinking again. I feel like through the pandemic, like a lot of people, I feel like we just naturally started drinking more because there was like nothing else to do. It kind of moved into this like, you know, have a cocktail every night because it was like a thing to do and it felt like a way to unwind. And then on the weekend, for a lot of it, the socialization could only be outside. So we would have people out in our backyard. We would have a fire pit and we would all have drinks. And it was like lovely, lovely times, great memories. But it just got to a point where I was like, wow, I'm like really drinking a lot again. And then Josh and I actually got COVID from like a surprise party that I threw him. And then obviously did not feel great after getting it. Luckily, mine was pretty short-lived for like compared to some people. But it was kind of the moment where there was like a pause. And I was like, you know what? We stopped drinking like every night because we were just like sick. And then after that, it was just kind of this moment where I'm like, you know what? I've cut it out before for fitness. I've cut it out a bit for gut health before. And I just feel like I want to give it a real go. And I started looking more into, you know, like the 3 month or 6 month effects and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, if I'm going to try it, I want to actually commit to trying it. So for me, it really started as like a gut experiment, which in a way, and we can speak to this, like I found it a little bit easier to stick to it because it felt like, oh, I'm doing something like one, a science experiment, and two, like it's for like a health reason. Because but that was kind of how I started that journey. And then as it went on, like became like less about the gut and more about everything else.
Mhm. Wow. And so would that have been did you just hit your 1 year this March, right? So was it March of 2021? Wow.
Yeah,
And,
or 2022.
oh yes, it's 2023, correct.
Yeah. I was like, yeah, you're right.
In the pandemic, I'm like, I have
Yeah,
no
who
idea
knows?
what year it is.
Who knows?
Okay, so it's March 2022, and now it's 2023. When that happened, did you ever think that it would become like a year sober?
I feel like the beginning, I was like 1 month, like 2 months, or like, oh, it's
Mhm.
almost 3 months, like it's 2.5. And I would get like so excited to like get there. And then I think it was around like probably the 8 month mark where I kind of just like forgot about it. Like I feel like March just all of a sudden, like it was October, November, and then all of a sudden we were at March and it really snuck up on me. And it was funny, like you mentioned that video I made. I said in the video, this one was a little bit harder to make than ones
Yeah,
I had made before because I was like, I don't know, it's just my life. Like I don't have that much to say about it, right? Whereas like when you're really going through that initial transition, at least for myself, that was like a lot more of like, how do we feel about this? And how do we feel
yeah.
about that? And now I'm just like, I don't know, I just don't order drinks and everybody in my life knows that. And it's become my normal, which is a really cool place to be too.
And I can so relate to that because I'm going to be 4 years sober, but obviously I work in the sobriety realm. Like that's
Mhm.
what I do. And so I feel like I have to almost be like reminding myself, of in order to write about it or post about it or think about it, because
Yeah.
it is literally just my life, like to,
Right.
to not be hungover. And it's kind of cool um, that I do have to like keep circling back to it to remind myself because I think
Yeah,
sometimes it's easy to forget, it just becomes normal.
totally. I've had that too with like when people ask about starting a business or if they're going through burnout, it's like this weird nostalgia to like take yourself back to be like, oh, I do remember being in that phase. And like, what did I need to hear at that time?
Totally. Totally. So in the early days, like what did you how did you get through it? Like what did you
Yeah.
rely on? What tools did you use?
I think always like well, one like tactical thing would just be like mocktails. Like a lot of what
Mm,
I liked about drinking was like the flavors and a like cute drink. Like I
yeah.
love like a cucumber mint, like gin
Mhm.
thing. And I liked the idea of like having friends come together and like the socialization of it. And so for me, continuing that socialization was big, but always making sure it was like a space where either I felt comfortable like being open about it or just finding those. I find there's like a scale of your transparency around it because you don't owe anyone the transparency. So you can decide in certain environments, like, you know what, I'm going to hold the red solo cup and no one's going to actually know that I'm not drinking. And like in some settings, that just feels better. And then in other settings, it feels totally comfortable to say, oh, I'm actually like trying this thing where I'm not drinking or, just saying I'm good. I think finding those different levels early on of like how open and it depends on like the people you're with, the setting that it is, even just like your own emotional context. Sometimes you're just like, I just don't have energy to do the back and forth of someone asking all the questions. And then other times you might be like, no, I'm really in the mood that if somebody were to ask those questions, I'm happy to share. And I think that was really important for me is like just measuring where I was feeling and then taking action based on that.
I love that you said that because I don't always think of it as a changing place on the scale, but of course our emotions and how we're doing is going to be different from day to day and from moment to moment and situation to situation. And so I got very comfortable early on talking about it, but I know for like there's days when it's just you don't feel like talking about it, or days when you're emotional or whatever. And so having that inner awareness and like mindfulness just to tap in and see what you need and then setting yourself up in a way for success, I think that is a really good insight, and knowing that it might be
Yeah,
different.
totally. And my partner has like younger cousins, as in like more in their early mid 20s. And so with them, it is tend to be like more of a house party vibe. And
Yeah.
for example, around, I think it was Christmas time or so, actually before I had alcohol, like the last night of drinking, that surprise party, I earlier that week had like accidentally drank too much on like a random Thursday. And I was like, oh, like that snuck up on me. So this night I'm not drinking that much. That was like kind of the right last drink. And even that night, I remember like I fully was like, mixing drinks and just putting like this much alcohol and then,
Mhm.
still cheersing. I've always been someone like I will fake a shot. If people are doing shots, like I'm never taking shots. I was never like past 18 kind of thing. I would just hold up a cup and like take a sip of my drink. But I think you can do the same thing of in a space like that. It felt like it was just taking away attention for people because it can be so obvious, right? If you're like holding up a
Yeah.
water bottle, people are like, oh, why aren't you drinking? Why aren't you drinking? And then it becomes this big thing. And I'm just like, oh, that's not what tonight is about. So I'm just going to hold up my red solo cup and no one has to know. And sometimes it feels nice to kind of have that secret. And it's not in like a shameful way. You're just like, no, tonight I'm just not going to have that conversation 17 times in a row.
Yeah, absolutely. Were there any events that you went to in the early days where people gave you a hard time about not drinking?
Oh, definitely. But I think it's like, I think what I realized is I was in a place where I could give people space if they needed time to come around. Like they weren't like upset. Like they weren't truly upset with me for not drinking. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
come on, just like have one. I know it wasn't like changing our relationship necessarily. So I felt like, okay, I can give you space for you to kind of like sort this out or for us to break down like why it doesn't actually like shouldn't actually be affecting you that I'm not drinking because I'm still like being my same self. I think that's a bit that I've learned is like people like to drink to let loose. Why aren't you drinking? And it's like, no, you can still let loose an alcohol in my cup. And like that can't be the only difference for us. Um, so that was really helpful for me. And just also like, again, about where you are, like I'm in a place where I can comfortably challenge someone because I'm like confident enough in myself of like, if they're like, oh, like you're not going to drink for this. I'm like, oh, like interesting. Like, why does it really matter to you? Right. And sometimes I just take that one question for them to step back and be like, oh, wait, yeah, like it doesn't matter. Or I have a lot of friends that are still in that fitness world. And, we said to one of our friends, if I was not drinking because I was training for like a bodybuilding competition, you probably let it be. But it's like the fact that somebody used to drink with you and now is just not drinking to not drink, they might have a bit more struggle to understand it or feel like they can sway you. They're like,
Mhm.
oh, just have one, just have one. But if they understand your goals, they don't try to sway you as much. But if it's a goal that like they can't quite see clearly, which is where also I found for me, leaning on the, oh, I'm trying it for my gut, people are like, oh, okay, it's like a health thing. Right. But it's so
Mhm.
interesting. It's like, why can't it just be that I don't want to? And you don't have to try to then peer pressure me just because I did before.
Mhm. That's so true. And there are two interesting things you shared there. Like one, the peer pressure thing about because you drank before. And I think that's important because there's people who don't experience that peer pressure around drinking, but they're often the people who have always been sober, or maybe for religion or for whatever reason
Right.
they have never drank, and so they can't relate to this. But it's a very specific peer pressure for people that used to drink and now don't, I feel. And
Yes.
especially the people that used to be like the life of the party and now don't. And I think having a tangible, also the other thing you said was having like a tangible reason that you don't drink. And that was a game changer for me because in the very early days, I didn't have the confidence to tell people why I was sober. And the main reason I was sober was for my mental health. And when I finally started telling people that, like I'm not drinking because it really impacts my mental health, people just stopped bugging me because that you would be like a huge asshole if you were like trying to
Yeah.
make me drink after I said that.
Yeah. And that's the hard thing. It's like, it sounds like a simple question to somebody on a Saturday night, but you also don't know what you're diving into, right? Like you said, for
Mhm.
a lot of people, it's like a mental health or their family has a history of alcohol abuse. And like that's can be a more loaded question than you realize. And I think the people asking are often actually not ready for a conversation like
Yeah.
that. So I think, like you said, you can either use it as that wall of like it shuts people up pretty quick, or it's also okay if like you're not in that place and you still need to lean on the like, oh, I'm driving tonight, or whatever's going to get you comfortable.
Totally. So tell me about, so I'm curious about, first of all, your business and how you started your business, and then also how sobriety impacted your business. But
Mhm.
before I ask you all that, I'm just curious, how old are you? I think we're in the same age range.
I'm turning 30 in like a month.
Okay, so you were born in, you're a year younger than me,
93.
1993.
Yeah.
Cool. It's so cool to meet other like female entrepreneurs in this age range that are just kind of like um doing their thing, taking over the world. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, when did you start your business, and tell me a bit about like that journey.
Yeah, so I started my first business when I was like just turned 22, maybe still just 21.
Mhm.
My partner and I had just started dating actually. So it's probably a horrible idea, but we're like still together 8 years later. But we started this business together and it was a powerlifting apparel company. So that was kind of our first venture, a product business, e-commerce. We grew up primarily through like Instagram and event sponsorships in the powerlifting community. And then from there, I got super, super burnt out, which was one of the times where I like eliminated alcohol along with a lot of other things to work on my gut stuff. The gut side of things has kind of been a long journey for me for sure. But that really caused me to step back, think about what I wanted from my business, and really refocus how I approach my business. And then I've always been like so in love with marketing and business. Like I love the marketing side of things and the behind the scenes of business. And so for me, after experiencing that burnout, I'm like, well, I want to help other entrepreneurs, that are so good at what they do, but the business side and the marketing side just like totally paralyzes them. They're not able to get the right eyes on them. They're not able to show up fully. And people can't see this beautiful thing that they do.
Mhm.
So that's when I started helping entrepreneurs build, but especially with that focus of without the burnout and finding a way to show up that actually feels really good to them, because there's so much generic advice out there that just feels really gross to so many of us. Like we're already choosing a non-traditional path. So it kind of makes sense that a lot of the advice we hear, even in the entrepreneurship space, isn't always going to apply to all of us, right? So that's really what I started focusing on. And so I have courses. I do a lot of free content about that. And then separately from that, my partner and I run a real estate team and we do some real estate investing ourselves. We're just about to start like a vacation property rental. So that's kind of like what I've got going on the business side.
Wow, amazing. And when you quit drinking, like how did that change did it improve your business, your productivity? Like what did you experience there?
Yeah, I definitely found like it's one of those things I always say it's so hard because I'm not living in like a siloed science experiment. People will be like, oh, like what did it do? And it's like, okay, well, obviously there's other factors, but I can pretty confidently say over the last year, like I do find my focus and like productivity has increased. A big one early on was like my memory. I used to have really good memory with numbers growing up, and then I found like along the way I kind of lost that, and that was the first thing where when you're like copying a code from something, or you check someone's phone number, like I just found I was retaining it better again, which was really
Wow.
interesting. Yeah, so that was a cool one for sure. And honestly, I feel like it's like any health change. When you're feeling good, it's like when we go to the gym and then we go too long without the gym, we forget how good it actually felt for our mental health,
Mm,
right? And we get back into that healthy cycle. I think it's like that of I didn't have the weekends where I felt like shit from like the Friday night. I found with me with drinking, I found I had like an unpredictable body reaction of sometimes I would drink less, but like be so hungover the next day. And so that was really hard for me of like it just felt so unpredictable. And then you want to spend the weekend doing certain things, but by the time Monday comes, you're like, oh, I just kind of like laid around and didn't feel good. So you don't go into your Monday feeling re-energized. So I think that was a really big difference. And like the most unsuspecting difference for me was just like confidence across the board. Like it really started with confidence in saying no, of like, oh no, I'm actually totally comfortable if someone else has an uncomfortable reaction to the fact that I'm not drinking. Like I'm good with that. I can sit in it and it's fine. Saying no either without an explanation, like all of that was really the early on confidence building. And I was definitely like a confident person to start, which is almost more interesting to me of like, it's not something I was going into it being like, I hope I'm more confident at the end of this. So I was really surprised to see it as a benefit. But even after that initial phase, it just became like, oh, I'm just like every day more confident in like the life I'm choosing to live, the person that I am, and even just like physically, like I just feel like your skin's glowing, you know, your
Yeah.
gut feels good, you're sleeping well, and you just start to be like, no, I really like myself, and it doesn't feel like that thing's going to add something to it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's amazing. It's beautiful. And so your partner Josh, does he drink? Is he sober as well?
He actually is like four. I'm like, what month are we? He's like four and a bit, 5 months sober now, actually. So
Amazing.
he decided he wanted to train for half Ironman before his
Mhm.
30s. He's a year younger than me. But so he started doing that. Also, he's curious and was watching me for months, like go through that experience and be more and more enjoying it through the months. And so that kind of got him curious. And then we went to his best friend's wedding in Mexico in December. And
Oh,
that was
yes.
really interesting because I remember even when you and I first talked, I was like, I think I told you, because this is a side, but I kind of kept quiet about being sober at the beginning. um, but I remember telling you, I'm like, yeah, I actually am sober, but I don't know if it's going to last. And in my head, I'm like, I
Yeah.
have this wedding in December. Like it almost felt like a timer of like, well, I'll probably drink on that week. So as it got closer, I was still a little like, I don't think I will, but we'll see how it goes. And he actually decided like the week before the trip that he was going to go sober as well. So
Wow.
it was like, I think he had maybe like one drink with the groomsmen kind of thing. Because I was like, make sure you give yourself some grace. It's like a hard week to transition when you're with like 60 people in Mexico for your best friend's wedding, right? Um, but it was really cool to do. And honestly, that was like the week that changed everything for me, where I was like, I am like locked in. This is the best thing ever. We would go out, dance all night with our friends. I was like middle of the dance floor. Like his friends were joking like that. They've known me for 8 years and they were like, where was this? Like, we've never seen you move this way. And I'm like, I'm dead cold sober right now, which is like the
Wow.
funniest part, right? Because people associate, like you said, like life of the party, they associate with like, oh, she's had like good drinks. And then people would like remember through the night, like, oh my God, you haven't drank anything. And I'm like, no, I haven't. And then we would wake up the next morning. Everyone would like have their turn of having their hangover morning. And every morning we were posting like stories from the sunrise. And then later in the day, people would be like, oh my God, it looks so beautiful. Like, you guys are doing it right. Like, everyone kept being like, oh, you guys are just doing it right. I'm like, I mean, no one's making you drink.
Yeah. Wow. And I wondering like, well, I was thinking a couple things. Do you think, because you said you weren't sure going into it, do you think Josh also being sober helped you in like staying sober that week? Or do you think that had any impact?
I don't know. It's a good question. There was actually somebody else sober as well, which was interesting because he was what we were talking about before. If he's always been sober, and I
Yeah.
didn't know him before. There was a bit of like worlds colliding on that week. We were saying it was interesting because no one pressured him. People pressured
Mm,
Josh and I all week, on and off. Like people were really good about it, but then there's always the moments of like, but we're all doing shots together. Just do like one shot. I think for me, like the I'm like when I commit, I commit, you
yeah.
know? So like for me, I'm like, if I've got 8 months without a drop in me, I found for that week, it was really about those micro moments of like, does this
Mhm.
one moment, is it worth like the one shot for me to like essentially feel like I'm throwing away the 8 months, whether that was true or not? I'm just like, I've gone this long with it out of my system. Every moment, I'm like, is this the moment that feels worth that? And it just never did. I'm like, when you see people like, and you find your strategies, right? Like when you see people start calling the bartender to order like 20 shots, you're like, I'm gonna like make my way this way. You just make yourself like not available in those moments. Or I'd have, a non-alcoholic drink. And if people are passing out shots, I'm like, no, I'm good. I have this. And I would just cheers with that. And then you realize like that moment is quickly over. And I always just felt so grateful that I didn't like give it all up for that one little silly moment, because I was
Mhm.
still part of the moment, right? I didn't actually need like that specific liquid to be part of that moment.
So true. And do you find, like, when you were talking about that experience, it reminded me actually of the first wedding that I went to sober. It wasn't like an all-inclusive experience in Mexico, but
Yeah.
it was a weekend away. It was my sister's wedding, and we went to summer camp growing up, and in Algonquin Park. And so her and her husband met at summer camp. So they wanted to do like this summer camp wedding.
Oh,
So we all went up, and it was like 2 full nights, and all our camp friends were there, and everyone was drinking. And we were all in this cabin together, like me and like my 10 summer camp friends. And on the first night, my group of friends got so drunk that they raided the kitchen, and which we used to do all the time at summer camp, which was like super funny.
yeah.
But one of them ate the wedding cake.
No.
Yeah. And luckily, like, she just like put her hand and ate it. Like, she totally forgot that it was like a wedding. And like, luckily my sister and her husband are just like so laid back, and everyone just thought it was really funny. And everyone had like good humor about it. But I was thinking, like, man, I'm so glad that I'm sober, because as her sister, as like her little sister, like if I had been in on this, like I don't think like she would have thought it was funny. Like I think she would have like,
it changes the tone when it's a sister.
I think she would have like literally killed me. And I just remember at the end of the weekend being like, man, I'm so glad I'm sober, because I would have just been drunk, probably doing stupid stuff, and then just feeling anxious or guilty or worried. And I was able to like really remember the whole wedding. And so for me, it actually made me more like, I wanted to stay sober longer, it inspired me. And so as you were sharing that, I was wondering, like, was there any like behavior like that you saw of people drinking where you were kind of like, I'm really glad that I'm not doing this?
Yeah. I mean, it's classic all-inclusive, right? I feel like everyone has like an afternoon or something where they've gone too far. So there's a few of those. For me, it was also like, it was so beautiful. We're talking like middle of winter, right? We had like the best sunny week. And even around lunchtime, people would be like, oh, I'm going to go get lunch so that later I'm not sick when I drink my face off, right? And like, just obviously, like, we still have lunch whether we're drinking or not, but sometimes you have a late breakfast. Like, it was crazy to me to realize like how much drinking came into my mental decisions before, especially with someone where like my gut would get upset by it, because I'd be that person like, oh, I got to make sure I have enough food because it's a little unpredictable. And some days I'm like, you know what, you guys go ahead. Like, I'm just going to lay on the beach because that feels nice right now. And I don't have to worry about like what reaction is going to happen in my body later. Like, I'm just going to have dinner and I'm going to be good. So that side of it was really nice. There was a moment too where it was funny. Okay. 2 things. One, the bride we did kind of like a bachelorette thing that week. She, certain times, like I said, it just hits the wrong way. Like, she was like out of it and ended up missing like most of the really nice dinner we had for her. And I just felt bad for her, right? Like, I was not thinking like, oh, I'm so glad I don't drink. But then the next day she's like, all I could think about is Mal's probably like so happy that she doesn't drink as she's watching me. So it was like going through her consciousness as she's like falling asleep. And I was like, no, I honestly just felt bad for you. But that part was funny. But there was one night where, you're like, everyone's getting food after, it was late after the wedding night. And this girl's like talking to me and she's like, when you're like pretty out of it, like, cause you're just that little bit too far. You're like, have that awareness that you're slurring your words. Like, she's like, oh no, I feel like I'm slurring. Like, I feel like I sound like an idiot. And it just really took me back to those days. And I'm like, oh, I'm so glad that I'm just like sitting here eating some French fries and like not putting that version of myself out, and not in a way of judgment for her, but it just really brought me back to like when I would be in that position. And I'm like, oh yeah, I don't want that. Like you said, it made me just be like, nah, I'm okay. I'm good.
Yeah. Oh, it has been so awesome to hear like more about your journey and your story and what led you to be alcohol free. And that is cool, actually, that we were connecting over such a long period of time. Because I think, like, did I talk to you like last summer when you were like, I'm not sure if I'm gonna be sober like long term? And
because I was like, I don't know. I feel weird doing your podcast because I don't know if it's a forever thing for me. I was like, I'm just trying to do a year and I might cheat in December,
And so what would
Yeah.
you say about it now? Like, do you think you're going to be sober long term? Like, what's your plan or your thoughts?
Yeah, I think so. It's like there's that one side where you're like, oh, a little champagne here and there doesn't hurt. But I'm like, again,
Yeah.
I'm just so curious about like putting that in my body after it's like the longer you go without it, I feel like the worse it will feel when you put it in. So I'm like, I don't know if I really need to experience that. And I think what I've really taken away is like looking at what we're actually looking for in those moments. It's usually like having like, you know, some socialization or it's connecting more intimately with people and just looking at like, can I actually get those things without the drink? And usually the answer is yes, right? Usually you can still very much be in on those intimate moments, the cheers, all of that.
Mhm.
I found like on New Year's, one of my friends that was hosting, like she bought non-alcoholic sparkling wine just so at midnight, like Josh and I had a version of champagne. Like I think too, when you have like a nice circle like that,
Yeah.
and also just seeing the way it's like influenced other people, like the bride and groom from that wedding actually are now, they've cut out alcohol. They are going to be doing like a fitness competition in 2 years, but now they're like alcohol free. And so
Wow.
it's cool because like, yeah, it's like slowly our group is more and more. And I think it just helps other people think of it. It's like every time they have a bad hangover or a bad night, they're like, maybe Mal's onto something. So I've had a few friends. It's cool that it's given this space for them to open up, ask questions about it more comfortably, less of a like, why are you doing this? And more like, okay, I'm kind of curious about this. And I'm feeling a little inspired. And it does obviously make it easier. Like you asked about if it made it easier for me that Josh wasn't drinking. I think I was far enough in my experience that it wasn't so much, but definitely the opposite. Like for him, it was
Yeah.
like huge that I wasn't drinking because it gives you like that safety net. Or I also have almost like warmed up his friends for months, being the one that doesn't drink, that for him to be like, me neither. It was like a little bit
Mhm.
easier. And I think that's what we're seeing with our friends now that are like, okay, we're also going to do this. And it's like no big deal. Nobody gives them a hard time, you know? We're just like, cool. So that's been really cool.
It's so cool. So I have one last question for you, which is that if you had any advice to someone who was in your shoes, like considering going alcohol free, a little like nervous about it or unsure, what advice would you give them? What would you say?
Yeah, I think just try it even for the confidence. Like,
Mm.
even if you decide to go back to drinking, that's totally fine if that's what you choose. But I think getting to that place where you're like, I can confidently say no, I'm not caving to peer pressure, because as much as we think that's like a high school thing, there's very much still peer pressure in our life all the time. And I think being okay with like showing up in those spaces and breaking those norms, I think will get you, like I said, I was already a confident person and I was surprised by how much more confident it made me in just like who I am and how I show up, and realizing like you can be a good time without alcohol. Maybe you're not that extreme version of you, or maybe you're like me where you actually are dancing more on the dance floor because you're like not afraid of falling over because you're drinking, you know, like it actually gave me that extra confidence. I think that's the biggest thing is like give it a shot. Always like take it the micro moments at a time. Like I said, going into that Mexico week, it's just every small event in that. I was like, is this the moment? Yes or no? No. And it felt good. But the week from afar maybe felt overwhelming. But just one event at a time, you'll realize how much you actually don't need the alcohol to participate.
Yeah, that's so true. That's great. Great little note to end on. It was so nice to finally meet you, Mallory. And it's so amazing to just have seen that journey or connected with you along that journey of like, going alcohol free. I'm alcohol free. I'm not sure if it's going to be forever. And, to have hit
Yeah.
your 1 year, it's just a huge accomplishment and milestone, especially with things like the Mexico trip and being an all inclusive. And so I think you should be really
Yeah.
proud of what you've overcome. And
Thank
it's super
you.
inspiring.
Thank you so much. It was so nice chatting about it.
Nice to chat with you too. And I think, as I shared at an earlier point, every single person's sober journey is different. And I love that your journey, like there's some people that are more extreme and then some people that are just like, everyday drinkers that are like curious about cutting it out. And so I bet there's people listening to this podcast that can resonate with parts of your story too.
Totally.
Right. Take care. Hi, friend. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Sober Yoga Girl podcast. This community wouldn't exist without you here, so thank you. It would be massively helpful if you could subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast so it can reach more people. If we haven't met yet in real life, please come get your 1-week free trial of the Sober Girls Yoga membership and see what we're all about. Sending you love and light wherever you are in the world.